All right, so today I'm going through CI/CD pipelines with Terraform Cloud. Um, Hopefully you guys can see the screen and it's not too small. If it is, please let me know. I will readjust it. Now, ideally, what we actually want to get out of this presentation today is three key points, right? Really, firstly, we want to look at Terraform workflows, and I'll talk about what workflows are in just a second. But Terraform workflows are quite an essential capability, a quite essential piece of the Terraform Cloud space. So I want to make sure that we have a clear definition of what workflows are and how we can actually go through the process of identifying the right workflows for yourself, your organization, your teams. Then specifically, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into API-driven workflows. And something that we've developed recently at HashiCorp is a TFCI tool. TFCI is really a Dockerized Go application that interacts with Terraform Cloud API endpoints and how we can use that to simplify a bit more of your API-driven processes. And then thirdly, I'm going to show you an actual live demo of this in action using GitHub Actions. But you can also use this tool for other sorts of capabilities with other sort of CI/CD pipelines as well, because it's a Dockerized Go application. Some prerequisites, however, something just to note is that we'll be using. So if you don't know us at HashiCorp, um, we are a we are a software company that helps a lot of organizations operate their cloud operating model. We have tools across a lot of different layers of your cloud operating stack. If you have infrastructure, secrets lifecycle management, networking, and even application orchestrations, we have toolings across all those different layers. Today, specifically, since we're looking at Terraform, we're really identifying that infrastructure layer. Now, if you don't know anything about Terraform, just know it as a infrastructure as code tool. You'll be able to write a series of different code in order for you to identify what resources you want to automate and provision. How we actually go through the provisioning process is with a platform called Terraform Cloud. Now, Terraform Cloud is a managed service offering of HashiCorp. And what this means is that there's a lot of underlying things that you need to build out in order to provision infrastructure quite smoothly with Terraform binary. Terraform Cloud takes away all that pain points for you by already having something that's built by HashiCorp and maintained by HashiCorp. So all you really need to focus on is your workflows and your config files. And I will be using the word workflows quite a little bit. So if you have a bingo card, if you've seen me on a few snapshots, I might repeat my words quite often. Workflows for today is going to be the main one. So have it in your bingo cards. The way I define workflows is, HashiCorp define workflows is a series of different steps. The three main steps I want you to think about when I say workflows is number one, writing. So when you need to write an infrastructure as code file or config file or Terraform HCL file. Planning. So when you need to preview any changes before doing a provisioning process, think of it as like running the Terraform plan command and then applying. So think about when you actually written the config file, you preview your changes. Now you actually need to automate the provisioning process. This is where the apply steps come in. So if you relate it back to Terraform, this is really the Terraform apply step. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive into how I even came about thinking about this snapshot, right? And really, if you look at Terraform Cloud or if you use Cloud quite extensively, you might realize that the really core component of it is the idea of workflows. And we always provide these three distinct workflows that you see on the screen right now. The VCS-driven workflow, this is where Terraform Cloud connects to a major VCS provider, your Bitbucket, GitHub, GitLab, Azure DevOps, your Git repositories essentially. And anytime you do a pull request or you merge your files into a main branch, you trigger a Terraform Cloud remote run. The CLI-driven workflow is for those of you who are more familiar with the Terraform binary. You do everything locally in your machine, but the execution if you run goes through Terraform Cloud. And then API-driven workflow, which is what we're probably all here today, is essentially how we can use something like a CI/CD tool to make a series of different calls to Terraform Cloud to orchestrate a few different steps as part of our provisioning workflow. The complication that we're trying to solve today is that you might be here because you've realized, hey, every organization, maybe every individual, maybe different teams in your goes through a different journey when it comes to infrastructure provisioning. The complication arises at those three different layers. Firstly, at a user level, you might start to identify, hey, as an engineer, I don't really know what workflow is going to suit me. I don't really know whether I should use the VCS workflow or the CLI or the API-driven workflow. And that's okay, right? This is what this snapshot's here for you today. It's to help identify what workflow suits best for you in your use cases. Then you might at the team level identify the idea of standardization. Maybe you want to standardize your workflows, but you don't really know whether which ones to use. And the truth of the matter is the different workflows that we have available may not always suit different teams and the way they use Terraform. So you might need to start identifying, hey, maybe instead of the idea of like standardization, we need to actually see what those use cases are, what is our practices capabilities are, what sort of resources do we have, and identify what works best for the current situation within our teams. And then when we start looking at sort of having more complex requirements or more flexible requirements, what we typically see is that now you might need actually a more complex implementation of a Terraform workflow. You might need to integrate with a lot of different toolings to meet the different use cases that's available out there. So ultimately, we actually see a lot of complication when we start talking about Terraform workflows because there's a lot of variables we need to take into account. So the main question and the question that we'll probably try to solve throughout the journey today in the snapshot is how are you using Terraform today? For me, I like to break it down into two areas. I always like to break it down into first and foremost, the guys on the ground, the guys who actually write the config files, your practitioners' knowledge levels, where are they at the moment? And then secondly, let's take a look at your use cases to identify what use cases should be using what sort of workflows. So I'm going to break it down into the crawl, walk, and run pattern. And we're going to take a look at your practitioner's knowledge level first. And I always do it in three parts because there's always different levels, and having a little bit more different tiering helps us identify who our users are and what the use cases are like. So firstly, we have Terraform Beginner at the crawling stage. These are the guys who or the ladies who are new to infrastructure as code. They are new to using Terraform as the IAC tool, and they're also sort of in this phase where they're trying to learn how to automate a lot of different things. Your Terraform experts are those who are more proficient at using Terraform. They know how to write modules, they know how to make it more modular and more reusable, and they also know how to resolve and troubleshoot Terraform related issues. Then you got your Terraform pros, and these are the individuals whose skill set extends beyond just infrastructure as code and extends beyond Terraform. They would also know things like how to create a CI/CD pipelines and integrate it with other tooling. They might also be very well versed in the ideas of different multi-cloud approaches, GitOps and DevOps learnings as well. Why these three different tiers are important is because within these three different tiers, we want to give them different levels of responsibilities. We might need to hold your hands in different sort of areas. If you're a Terraform beginner or if you got a Terraform beginner in your team, we're not going to tell them to immediately start doing a CI/CD pipeline API-driven workflow because firstly, we need to be more prescriptive with them because we need to make sure that we set guardrails in place as they go through and learn a little bit more about automation and provisioning of infrastructure. Now, at the Terraform expert level, we say it's a little bit more neutral because we want to give them the ability to be flexible. But at the same time, we also need to be prescriptive because there might be governance procedures we need to have in place in our organizations. And then your Terraform Pro, they are probably the guys or the ladies who need to a little bit more flexibility in their approaches because they are the ones who will be dealing with a lot of complex use cases. And complex use cases typically means they need a little bit more flexibility in the ways that they can resolve these different problems. So with the prescriptive, the neutral, and flexibility concept in mind, this actually ties into the different workflows that's available on Terraform Cloud. And this was also the ideology that we had in generating these three approaches. Your VCS-driven workflow, we define it as prescriptive, CLI as neutral, and API as flexible. Why do we do that in this sort of manner? And this is where we can start defining which workflow best suits you. It's really because in the VCS-driven workflow, when you're prescriptive, this is what we call a very guided workflow. At HashiCorp, when we created a VCS-driven workflow, all you'll be doing is you create a pull request that creates a speculative plan. When you merge it into your main branch, you deploy your Terraform remote runners, and that's really the end of that VCS-driven workflow. So you start to see that, hey, this is a very common and very simple mechanism. And ultimately, all that we need to manage is our integration with our VCS repo. And then on Terraform Cloud, maybe your Sentinel policies, maybe your runtime integration. That's about it. So the key things to keep in mind when you want to figure out when should you use a VCS-driven workflow, you probably already have your code existing in some sort of repo, a VCS repo, or Git repo. And your deployment is always going to be just Terraform specific. You're not going to do anything additional pre-Terraform or post-Terraform workflows. And you also want to maximize the time to value that you have in terms of trying to solve the problem that you have. So you don't want to spend too much time on it. You know it's just going to be provisioning infrastructure. The VCS-driven workflow will be best suited for those use cases because all you're doing, writing Terraform config files, creating pull requests for reviews, merging it back into the main branch for deployments. CLI-driven workflows, a little bit more flexibility there because when we use CLI-driven workflows, we essentially have the Terraform binary locally in our machine, and the Terraform binary is just a wrapper around the Go TFE API client. And what this allows us to do is that we have a lot more commands that allows us to facilitate the provisioning workflow. And so ideally, what we can do is that we can output our plans. Maybe we want to do additional things to the plans, store it somewhere. Maybe we want to have a flag that helps us do some sort of validation or formatting or linting. Those sort of commands are available in the CLI-driven workflow. But the thing about CLI-driven workflow is that it's also still focused on just Terraform itself. So nothing extra around it. So some key things to think about when you use a CI-driven workflow is, does your team right now, do they operate by running commands locally on their machines? Are they comfortable with a CI tool? And are they also comfortable in managing Terraform versions? Because you might have the CI-driven workflow implemented in a CI/CD pipeline, but CI/CD pipeline uses the Terraform binary. So you need to know how to make sure you manage the lifecycle of different Terraform versions. And if you want to have sort of that hybrid approach where you want to have guardrails in place, but you also want to make sure that you have some sort of flexibility in resolving your use cases, the CI-driven workflow is sort of where a lot of people tend to use that for. Now, the final one is the API-driven workflow, the most flexible, but also the most complex. Why API-driven is the most flexible is because you have granular controls over every step in your provisioning workflow. And I mean every step. That means you can create the workspace, you can create the run, you can choose when you want to conduct a Terraform plan, you can choose what you want to do between the Terraform plan and then the Terraform apply. You have every control over each of these different steps. And typically, we utilize a CI/CD pipeline. And within the CI/CD pipeline of an API-driven workflow, we don't just use it for Terraform. We might actually, before this pipeline, go through a process where we generate the virtual machine images that we want to use for this pipeline. And then post Terraform provisioning, you might need to do some sort of config management to whatever infrastructure you've just provisioned. And this is where the API-driven workflow really works well. So definition of API-driven workflow and how to quantify when you should use it. You like pain, you enjoy working with a lot of API endpoints. The more difficult it is, the more you like it. No, I'm just kidding. Really, that was a terrible joke, but what I was trying to emphasize there is that it's very painful to do an API-driven workflow, but the pain is only because it's super flexible and there's a lot of controls that you can have over the entire workflow. So if you want to be able to have control over each step of the process, if you have workflows that goes beyond Terraform itself, and you also have the resources and capability to meet those complex implementation of an API-driven workflow, this is the workflow for you. And I'll actually showcase how we can go into that right now. Sorry, I talked a lot, but I feel like the philosophy pieces of workflow is the most important. The actual demo itself, super simple. So what I'll be using today is called the TFCI tool. If you check our website, and let me grab the address for you and I'll put it inside the Zoom chat. If you want to have a look at this tooling, if you check your Zoom chat, there is a link that takes you to GitHub where this tooling exists. Now, we say this is for GitHub or GitLab, but it is a Dockerized Go application, so you can use it in a few other CI/CD pipelines as well. But within this CI/CD tool, what this allows you to do is that we simplify the whole process of writing a CI/CD pipeline for you. No longer do you need to worry about how do you actually call different endpoints in the TFC API endpoints. What sort of payload do you need? What sort of attributes you're going to need? No, this whole tooling actually simplifies it because we break it down into different actions. So on the screen right now, we have a few of the different actions that it's available within the CI tooling. Ultimately, if you're just using an API-driven run, you only need 4 steps. You only need upload configuration, create run, plan output, and then apply run. So all these steps allows you to go from uploading the config file all the way to deployment. And I can talk a little bit about the benefits between using this tooling and using the Terraform binary probably at the end, if you have questions around why you would use this over the other. But in the demo today, what I'll be doing is this is my entire demo flow. I already set up my Terraform Cloud platform. I'm going to go in my GitHub to do some code commit, pull requests, go into my pipeline and update my pull requests before I merge it back into my apply pipeline. So what we're going to see now is this entire process. I'm going to quickly go into my GitHub, make some simple code commits. Just going to change the instance type. I'll create a pull request. From that pull request, we'll actually go into the pipeline, which uploads the config file, create a run, and then we get some planned outputs to update our pull request. Let's see this in action real quickly. So this is my repo. It's nothing too complicated. You can definitely have access to this. I'll put it in the link there if you want to have a look. I'm just going to do my edits directly in my GitHub repo because I'm not doing anything crazy. But I will change my instance types to T2 large. And I'm going to commit my change and create a new branch for this. Why I'm creating a new branch is so that I can actually create a pull request that allows me to, yes, that allows me to trigger my run. So I'm just double checking that. So when I create my pull request, we go into, of course, if you've seen the pull request, we go into this page where very shortly we'll actually have my GitHub Actions operating for us. In my GitHub Actions, the 3 steps I'm going through is number 1, I'm uploading my config file to Terraform Cloud. So I don't actually have to download my providers, my modules into my code itself. I actually upload my config to Terraform Cloud where the Terraform Cloud runners does the entire process for me. Then we'll go through the Terraform planning stages, and then we'll just update our PR after. If I was to shift to my Terraform Cloud UI and go into the workspace where I actually have this hosted, inside my runs, because I'm running a speculative plan, this is where my Terraform Cloud UI will do a lot of the heavy lifting for me. So if I have integrations with other tooling, I don't have to worry about coding it up inside my pipeline anymore as well. I can actually do it using the runtask integration. So if you use things like InfraCost, like Sneak, for example, Terraform Cloud's native connectors to all of these partners that we work with, and well, with these partners, we have native access to it as well that allows us to implement all these runtask integrations as part of the workflow. Uh, Trung, great question. Did you give super admin permission to Terraform Cloud? For this demonstration, yes, but you can create different teams in Terraform Cloud, give it specific permissions to that teams itself, and then you can generate a token to be used as part of the pipeline to speak to Terraform. So you have better granularity in the controls. But for demonstration purposes, I am using a super admin, but in realistic or in prod, you wouldn't do that. You would create different teams with different permissions. So what I've done is in my post plan, I've integrated with InfraCost to get me a cost estimation. And I've written a runtask policy to check and make sure that this deployment itself is under a specific budget that I've set. So my Terraform Cloud will do the heavy lifting for me here. And ultimately, what I need to do now is that my pull request, you can see, is actually updated with the output that I have. And I'll merge my pull request directly back um, into my main branch, which would then trigger a run very shortly in my Terraform Cloud. If we give it a couple of seconds, And if I'm speaking really fast right now, it's only because I'm starting to realize I'm running out of time for this snapshot. But we're at the end, I promise that. The end CentOS TFE Cloud has the same features with TFE. We have almost all the feature parity, I believe. There might be like some minor pieces that's different, but eventually it will reach that feature parity. You can see, there we go. The run is now being triggered and the whole deployment process goes through. If you have any questions, guys, please make sure to put it in the Q&A section so we can answer that. That will help us. That will help us track the questions and also for any follow-ups as well. Cool. So sorry, back to my presentation. In terms of using the TFCI tool, this is all I'm doing right now. I have it set so that on pull requests, and I have some environment variables. My API token, of course, I store it in my secret store at the moment. If you use Vault, we have a secret sync capability, so you can store your token inside Vault and you can sync it across to GitHub, for example. I specify my workspace, and I've also specified where I'm actually storing that config files for Terraform. All I'm using now is that you see this users section here. This is where I'm using the actual tool, TFCI tool, as part of my workflow. I specified which workspace, which directory to conduct this upload of my config files. I'm going to make it do a create plan or create run, which runs a Terraform plan for me, and I get the plan output. If I was to do an apply, I would actually use a create apply run action, and that would help me go through the whole provisioning process through Terraform Cloud, which is the final step over here. I didn't show it only because of time. But if you go into the templates inside the GitHub repo, you actually see the template showcasing all the different actions and how to use each of those actions as part of your workflow. Cool. Um, that's really the end of my presentation. However, quick summary, every team, every journey, every user, every organization have a different journey. Make sure you know and identify what sort of use cases that you have, what's the skill level of your team, and whether there is need for you to go through the VCS workflow, the CLI, or the API-driven workflow. My principle is always go through the simplest workflow that suits our use cases at that time, because the faster you set up your workflows, the faster you set up your automation, the faster you can get some sort of value out of the entire process. In terms of next steps, we actually have another webinar being run by Senior Solutions Architect Simon Lynch. He's a great colleague of mine, great friend, and he's actually running a integration of an API-driven workflow, but this time with HB Vault Secrets. And with Vault Secrets, he'll actually show you how you can actually store those sensitive secrets in your Terraform workflows inside a more secure environment, and how to actually go through the whole provisioning process with the Vault Secrets itself. Cool. And that's it for my presentation today. Thank you, everyone.